Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's story marks one of the most dramatic and consequential moments of this entire conflict. It is a moment that many believed would never happen, a moment surrounded by doubt, fear, and deeply entrenched assumptions. The fall of Russian control over Crimea has finally become a reality. Crimea has been retaken at last, and with it, the foundations of the war itself have been shaken. For years, Crimea stood as the ultimate symbol of control, power, and permanence. It was the territory that was supposed to be untouchable, the red line that could never be crossed, the place that represented not just military dominance, but political identity and historical narrative. Its loss now represents far more than a change on the map. It represents the collapse of a belief system that shaped the war from the very beginning. To understand why this moment matters so deeply, we need to look beyond the headlines and examine what Crimea truly meant, how Russian control was established, why it endured for so long, and how it ultimately fell. Crimea was never just another region. From the moment it was seized years ago, it became the cornerstone of a broader strategy. It offered control of the Black Sea, access to warm, water ports, and a powerful platform for projecting military force across the region. It also became a powerful symbol used to demonstrate strength at home and defiance abroad. Russian control over Crimea was presented as permanent, irreversible, and unquestionable. It was framed as a historical correction, a restoration of rightful ownership, and a strategic necessity. Over time, this narrative hardened. Crimea became woven into national identity, political messaging, and long-term military planning. Losing it was not supposed to be possible. For Ukraine, Crimea was a constant reminder of unfinished sovereignty. Every year that passed reinforced the pain of its loss, but also the determination to reclaim it. No Ukrainian government could afford to abandon Crimea without undermining its legitimacy. No vision of peace felt complete without addressing it. Even when military realities made retaking Crimea seem impossible, it remained the ultimate goal. Internationally, Crimea became a frozen issue. Many governments condemned its seizure, but quietly assumed it would remain under Russian control indefinitely. Analysts debated scenarios, but most concluded that Crimea would only ever change hands through negotiations, not force. Over time, a dangerous assumption took hold, that some territorial gains once entrenched could not be undone. That assumption has now collapsed. The fall of Russian control over Crimea did not happen suddenly. It was not the result of a single offensive or a dramatic overnight breakthrough. It was the outcome of a long, grinding process that slowly eroded the foundations of control until they could no longer hold. The first cracks appeared in logistics. Crimea's strength depended on its connections to the mainland. Bridges, ports, railways, and sea routes kept it supplied with fuel, ammunition, food, and reinforcements. As these links came under sustained pressure, holding Crimea became increasingly difficult. Each disruption forced longer routes, higher costs, and greater risk. The Kerch Bridge, once celebrated as a symbol of permanence and engineering triumph, became a strategic vulnerability. Even partial disruptions had outsized effects. Supplies slowed, confidence weakened. The idea that Crimea was safely anchored to the mainland began to fade. The second phase was military degradation. Crimea had been transformed into a fortress, layered with air defenses, coastal missile systems, radar installations, and naval assets. For a long time, these defenses appeared formidable, but modern warfare does not reward static assumptions. Over time, key systems were damaged, blinded, or forced to relocate. Command centers were disrupted. Ammunition depots were hit. The defensive shield grew thinner. Naval dominance also eroded. Russian control of the Black Sea relied heavily on bases in Crimea. As these bases came under increasing threat, naval operations became riskier. Ships were damaged, withdrawn, or forced to operate more cautiously. Control of maritime space became contested. What was once unquestioned dominance turned into uncertainty. At the same time, psychological pressure intensified. Troops stationed in Crimea were no longer shielded from the realities of the war. Bases once considered safe were suddenly vulnerable. Explosions were no longer rare events, but recurring reminders that the peninsula was no longer untouchable. Morale began to decline. Psychology is critical in prolonged conflicts. When soldiers believe they are defending something permanent, they endure hardship more easily. When they begin to feel isolated, exposed, and expendable, cohesion breaks down. The belief in Crimea's invulnerability had been a powerful force. Once that belief disappeared, everything changed. The information environment shifted as well. Narratives of control and stability struggled to explain growing disruptions. Each incident raised questions that could not be fully answered. Public confidence eroded. International observers began to reassess their assumptions. Crimea was no longer seen as a fixed reality, but as a contested one. When the decisive phase arrived, it unfolded faster than most expected. Once critical defensive nodes were neutralized and supply lines strained beyond sustainability, holding Crimea became strategically irrational. Units faced the prospect of being cut off without reliable resupply. Air cover could no longer guarantee protection. Evacuation routes were threatened. Command and control weakened. What followed was a cascading collapse. Positions were abandoned, equipment was left behind, coordination faltered. Some units withdrew under pressure, others surrendered when resistance became futile. The fortress that had taken years to build unraveled in a fraction of that time. Russian control over Crimea fell. Crimea was retaken at last. The impact of this moment cannot be overstated. Militarily, the battlefield has been transformed. Crimea had served as a central hub for operations across southern regions. Its loss immediately altered the geometry of the conflict. Supply routes were disrupted, missile and artillery coverage shrank, coastal defenses shifted, control of the Black Sea entered a new phase. For Ukraine, this meant increased operational freedom. Southern fronts became more secure. Maritime routes gained new importance. Strategic planning could shift from constant defense to proactive positioning. The balance of power along the coast changed decisively. Psychologically, the shock was profound. For years, the belief that Crimea was permanent under Russian control shaped morale, messaging, and strategy. Its fall shattered that belief. It proved that even the most fortified, symbolic positions could be reclaimed. It sent a powerful message across the entire front line: nothing is truly untouchable. For Ukrainian society, the retaking of Crimea represented validation. Validation of sacrifice, validation of endurance, validation of the belief that persistence matters. It transformed hope into tangible reality. On the opposite side, the loss of Crimea created a crisis of confidence. Crimea had been a cornerstone of identity and legitimacy. Its fall raised uncomfortable questions about leadership, strategy, and the true cost of the war. Narratives built over years could not easily absorb such a loss. Trust weakened, doubts spread. Politically, the consequences were immediate and far-reaching. Domestically, the fall of Crimea challenged years of justification and messaging. It forced a reckoning with reality that could not be easily explained away. Internationally, negotiating leverage shifted dramatically. Crimea could no longer be treated as a fixed bargaining chip. The premise of frozen gains collapsed. For Ukraine, the political impact was transformative. Crimea's return strengthened sovereignty and legitimacy. It unified political forces around a historic achievement. It reinforced confidence among allies and demonstrated that long-term support could produce decisive outcomes. It changed how future objectives were perceived, not as distant dreams, but as achievable goals. Globally, this moment is being watched closely. Other regions with long-standing territorial disputes are reassessing assumptions. Analysts are rethinking the idea that time always favors the occupier. The belief that fortification guarantees permanence has been challenged. Crimea's retaking has become a case study in modern warfare, strategy, and resilience. At the same time, this moment introduces new uncertainties. History shows that turning points can be dangerous. The collapse of a cornerstone can lead to negotiation, or it can provoke escalation. It can encourage restraint, or it can harden positions. The period following such a shift is often the most volatile. What happens next will depend on decisions made in the aftermath. Will this lead to serious diplomatic efforts or further confrontation? Will restraint prevail, or will attempts be made to reverse the loss? Will this moment shorten the war, or extend it in new and unpredictable ways? One thing is certain. The war after Crimea is not the same as the war before it. Strategies must be rewritten, assumptions must be abandoned, military planning must adapt to a reality that few believed possible not long ago. The psychological landscape has shifted permanently. The fall of Russian control over Crimea marks the end of an era. It marks the collapse of the idea that some conquests are irreversible. It challenges the belief that time alone can legitimize force. It reminds the world that endurance, strategy, and adaptability can overturn even the most entrenched positions. As the dust settles, historians will debate the causes, analysts will dissect the execution, and political leaders will frame the narrative. But beneath all of that analysis lies a simple truth. Crimea has been retaken at last. And with that, the war has entered a new chapter, one defined not by inevitability, but by possibility. A chapter that will shape the future of the region and influence how conflicts are understood in the modern world. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next update.